September 19th, 1944. Westkapelle, Netherlands. The morning mist clung to the coastal dunes as Captain Roland Tilbury of British military intelligence gazed through his binoculars at the still smoking impact crater. 200 meters wide and 50 meters deep, the devastation had come from nowhere, a weapon that arrived without warning, faster than sound itself. "This is the future of warfare," he murmured to his reconnaissance team. "Hitler's vengeance weapon will turn the tide of this war." In his leather-bound notebook, he scribbled estimates of the damage that would have occurred had this rocket struck central London instead of an empty Dutch field. Little did he know that the very weapon he feared would soon reveal one of the Third Reich's greatest strategic blunders. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. This is the untold story of Operation Backfire, when British engineers dismantled, reassembled, and launched captured German V-2 rockets, discovering not only technological marvels, but also a profound truth: that Nazi Germany had squandered its most revolutionary weapon on a strategy that could never win the war. Major Thomas Reynolds pulled his woolen greatcoat tighter around his shoulders as the October wind cut across the airfield at Farnborough. As the lead engineer for the newly formed Backfire Technical Committee, Reynolds had spent the past 3 weeks coordinating the arrival of captured German rocket components from across liberated Europe. His breath formed clouds in the frigid morning air as he watched Royal Engineers unloading crates from the convoy of Bedford trucks that had arrived from Portsmouth. "What do you make of it all?" "Professor," Reynolds asked, turning to the man beside him. Professor William Penny, a physicist from the Imperial College London who had been reassigned to the Ministry of Supply, studied the components through wire-rimmed glasses. "It's remarkable, Major. If the specifications in our intelligence reports are accurate, the Germans have managed to create a ballistic missile capable of reaching an altitude of 80 kilometers and speeds of 5,000 kilometers per hour. Nothing in our arsenal comes remotely close." Reynolds nodded grimly. "And yet London still stands. The war is all but won. Something doesn't add up, Professor." "That," said Penny, "is precisely why we're here." Across the Channel, Oberleutnant Werner von Braun sat in a makeshift American interrogation room at a forward operating base near Luxembourg. Despite his rank in the SS, von Braun wore civilian clothes, a concession from his American handlers who recognized his scientific value transcended political affiliations. Captain Robert Staver of the United States Army Ordnance Corps pushed a cup of coffee across the table. "Let's continue where we left off yesterday, Doctor," Staver said, flipping open a notebook. "You mentioned production challenges at Mittelwerk." Von Braun nodded, his eyes betraying exhaustion from weeks of intensive questioning. The underground facility at Nordhausen had a theoretical capacity of 900 V-2s per month. In practice, we never exceeded 396, and of those perhaps 70% would function as designed. "Why such poor reliability?" Staver pressed. Von Braun's face darkened. The workforce consisted primarily of concentration camp prisoners from Mittelbau-Dora, malnourished, abused, working under brutal conditions. Many sabotaged the rockets when SS guards weren't watching. Small irregularities in welding, microscopic contaminants in fuel lines, impossible to detect until launch. He didn't mention that an estimated 20,000 prisoners had died producing these weapons, a fact that would haunt him for decades to come. Back at Farnborough, Technical Sergeant Harold Winters supervised as soldiers carefully unpacked oxidizer tanks, combustion chambers, and guidance systems. A former automotive engineer from Birmingham, Winters had been selected for the Backfire team for his expertise in reverse engineering. He whistled softly as workers revealed the turbopump assembly. "Would you look at that craftsmanship?" he said to Corporal James Bennett, who was photographing each component for technical documentation. Precision milled to tolerances of .005 millimeters, in the middle of a losing war, no less. Bennett lowered his camera. "Seems a waste, doesn't it? All this engineering brilliance spent on a terror weapon." "Terror weapon?" Winters raised an eyebrow. "Is that what you think this is? What else would you call it? They fired over 3,000 of these things at London and Antwerp, killed thousands of civilians. Winters ran his fingers along the aluminum alloy skin of a tail fin. "That's what troubles me, Bennett. If I had a revolutionary weapon like this, I wouldn't waste it trying to terrorize civilian populations. I'd target airfields, ports, troop concentrations. Something doesn't add up." In London, Winston Churchill studied the preliminary report on the V-2 program that had been placed on his desk by General Ismay. Though victory in Europe was now merely a matter of time, the Prime Minister's expression remained grave as he contemplated the implications of the German rocket program. Had they perfected this weapon earlier, Churchill mused, had they allocated proper resources from the beginning instead of dismissing it as a fantasy, history might have unfolded quite differently. "Indeed, Prime Minister," Ismay agreed. "Our analysts estimate that had Hitler prioritized the V-2 program in 1940 instead of 1942, they could have deployed upwards of 10,000 rockets before our Normandy landings." Churchill tapped his fingers on the report. "And what of this Operation Backfire? Can our engineers truly reassemble and launch these weapons?" Major Reynolds believes so. They've secured enough components for 3 complete launches. The Dutch coastal site at Altenwalde has been prepared. If successful, we'll gain invaluable insight into German rocket technology, knowledge that may prove critical in our relations with the Soviets in the coming years. Churchill nodded slowly, his thoughts clearly drifting to the post-war world that would soon emerge from the ashes of conflict. "Ensure Reynolds has whatever resources he requires. I want British rockets, Ismay, better than the German ones. The war after this war may not involve bullets and bayonets at all." At the Royal Aircraft Establishment, Dr. Eleanor Hughes, one of the few female scientists cleared to work on the Backfire project, meticulously examined the V-2's guidance system. With degrees in both electrical engineering and mathematics from Cambridge, Hughes had spent the war years developing countermeasures against German navigation systems. Now she found herself admiring the ingenuity of her former adversaries. "The gyroscopic stabilization platform is unlike anything I've ever seen," she explained to Major Reynolds during his inspection tour. 2 free gyroscopes working in tandem, feeding data to an analog computer that adjusts graphite rudders in the exhaust stream. Absolutely brilliant for 1943 technology. Reynolds frowned. "Can it be defeated, jammed or confused?" "That's the fascinating part, Major. It's entirely self-contained. No radio signals to jam, no external references needed. Once launched, nothing can stop it except physical interception, which at 5 times the speed of sound is virtually impossible with current technology." "And yet," Reynolds said, "for all this innovation, the accuracy was abysmal. Average miss distance of 17 kilometers from target at a range of 300 kilometers. Hughes nodded. "Precisely. They created a weapon that could not be stopped, but also could not be aimed with any precision. Perfect for terrorizing large cities like London, useless against military targets. It's as if they designed it specifically to waste resources on civilian casualties that couldn't possibly affect the strategic outcome. Unless," Reynolds said thoughtfully, "that was exactly the point." As October gave way to November, Operation Backfire intensified. At the captured German testing facility in Cuxhaven on the North Sea coast, British engineers worked around the clock to prepare for the first test firing. Technical Sergeant Winters had been promoted to team leader for the propulsion systems, working directly with German technicians who had surrendered to Western forces rather than risk capture by the advancing Soviets. Among these was Dr. Klaus Hoffmann, formerly of the Peenemünde Army Research Center, who had served as a junior colleague to von Braun before the latter's transfer to the American zone. Despite his initial reluctance, Hoffmann gradually developed a professional respect for Winters as they labored to reassemble the complex engines. "You must understand," Hoffmann explained, as they worked late one evening, calibrating fuel injection ratios. "The V-2 was never merely a weapon in Peenemünde. For those of us who began the project before the war, it represented the future of human exploration, space travel, orbiting satellites, even reaching the moon someday." Winters tightened a fuel coupling with a torque wrench, hard to reconcile those dreams with a weapon that fell randomly on civilian homes. Hoffmann's expression darkened. "That was never our intention. When the Wehrmacht took control of the program in 1940, we were ordered to weaponize our research, Those who objected disappeared. Some to the Eastern Front, others to places we dared not ask about. He paused, weighing his next words carefully. What few outside our inner circle knew was that many of us deliberately stalled the weaponization process. Technical challenges that required months of research, design flaws that necessitated complete overhauls. Had we worked with genuine enthusiasm, the V-2 could have been operational by 1941, not 1944. Winters stopped working and studied the German scientist's face, searching for deception but finding only weary resignation. You're saying you sabotaged your own program? Not sabotage exactly, more a lack of urgency. And we weren't alone. Albert Speer, Hitler's armaments minister, once calculated that the resources devoted to the V-weapons program could have produced 24,000 fighter aircraft. 24,000. Imagine the Battle of Britain with those numbers, or the Allied bombing campaign against German industry facing such opposition. Hoffmann shook his head. Every rocket that terrified London was one less fighter to shoot down the bombers destroying our cities, a strategic catastrophe disguised as a wonder weapon. The first test firing was scheduled for December 3, 1945. Despite the official end of hostilities in Europe, Operation Backfire had continued at accelerated pace, its importance elevated by growing tensions with the Soviet Union, which had captured its own share of German rocket scientists and components. The morning dawned clear and cold at Cuxhaven. A delegation of senior officers from Britain, the United States, France, and Canada assembled at the observation bunker, along with scientific observers from each nation. Professor Penny stood beside Major Reynolds, both men tense with anticipation. "Fuel loading complete," came the announcement over the field telephone. "Oxidizer pressurization in progress." Reynolds turned to Penny. 7 months ago, these rockets were falling on London. Now we're deliberately launching one ourselves. History has a sense of irony, doesn't it? "More than you know," replied Penny. "I've been analyzing the production costs based on captured German records. Each V-2 required approximately 140,000 Reichsmarks to produce, equivalent to 4 Messerschmitt Bf 109 fighters. For the cost of their entire rocket program, the Luftwaffe could have doubled its fighter strength on the Western Front." Guidance systems active. The field telephone crackled. Gyroscope spinning up to operational speed. Reynolds stared through the reinforced glass at the sleek missile standing vertically on its launch platform, vapor venting from its sides as liquid oxygen boiled off in the morning sun. Why would they make such a fundamental strategic error? Hitler was many things, but he understood military priorities. Penny shrugged. Perhaps it wasn't about military effectiveness at all. The V-2 was unique, the first weapon against which there was no defense. The psychological impact of such invulnerability may have seemed worth the cost, particularly to a regime increasingly divorced from strategic reality. Final countdown initiated. 10, 9, 8. 300 meters away, Technical Sergeant Winters stood beside Dr. Hoffmann in the secondary control bunker, where they would monitor engine performance throughout the brief flight. The German scientist's hands trembled slightly as the countdown continued. "Are you all right, Doctor?" Winters asked. 5, 4, 3. "This was our dream," Hoffmann whispered. "Not as a weapon, but as a gateway to the stars. To see it launched by foreign hands as a scientific curiosity rather than an instrument of war. There is justice in this moment, Sergeant Winters, a redemption of sorts. 2, 1, ignition!" A blinding flash erupted from the base of the rocket as alcohol and liquid oxygen combined in the combustion chamber. Flame and steam billowed across the launch area as the missile seemed to hover momentarily, gathering strength. Then, with astonishing acceleration, it began to climb, slowly at first, then with rapidly increasing velocity. "Thrust nominal," Winters confirmed, eyes fixed on pressure gauges. "Chamber temperature within parameters." Within 30 seconds, the rocket was merely a diminishing point of light against the clear blue sky, trailing a thin white exhaust plume as it arced toward the North Sea. In the main observation bunker, the assembled officers and scientists watched in stunned silence, few having witnessed the weapon in action before. Maximum altitude 83.7 kilometers, reported a technician monitoring radar tracking. Speed at engine cutoff 5,500 kilometers per hour. Impact in designated C-zone, predicted in 4 minutes, 32 seconds. "My God!" breathed an American colonel standing behind Reynolds. "We have nothing like this, nothing even close." Reynolds turned to him. "And yet, Colonel, would you trade 24 of your P-51 Mustangs for one of these rockets?" The American looked confused. "Of course not. A single P-51 can conduct multiple missions, adapt to battlefield conditions, return for maintenance and reuse. And for the cost of this rocket, we could indeed build many fighters." "Precisely," said Reynolds. "The Germans created the most sophisticated weapon of the war, then deployed it in perhaps the least efficient manner possible. One use, minimal accuracy, no capacity to affect actual military operations." In the weeks that followed, 2 more V-2s were successfully launched from Cuxhaven, each test yielding valuable data on performance, reliability, and potential improvements. But for Major Reynolds and his team, the technical achievements were increasingly overshadowed by the strategic implications of their findings. In late December, Reynolds presented his preliminary report to a joint Anglo-American Intelligence Committee at the War Office in London. Present were senior military officials, government representatives, and scientific advisors from both nations, all keenly aware that the emerging Cold War with the Soviet Union made rocket technology a matter of urgent national security. "Gentlemen," Reynolds began, standing beside a detailed technical diagram of the V-2, "what you see before you represents both the most advanced weapon deployed during the recent conflict and one of the most profound strategic miscalculations in modern warfare." He activated a slide projector, displaying a chart of resource allocation in the German war economy. By 1944, the Third Reich devoted approximately 5% of its total war production capacity to the V-weapons program, resources that could have produced 3,700 additional tanks, 2,200 artillery pieces, or over 24,000 fighter aircraft. A murmur ran through the assembled officials as the implications sank in. "Furthermore," Reynolds continued, "our analysis indicates that even with perfect accuracy, which the V-2 never achieved, the explosive payload of 1,000 kilograms was insufficient to damage hardened military targets such as airfields, port facilities, or fuel depots. In essence, Germany devoted precious industrial capacity to creating a terror weapon that could not possibly influence the strategic balance, even if deployed in numbers 10 times greater than actually achieved." Air Marshal Sir Charles Portal leaned forward. "Yet Hitler was famously obsessed with these weapons, even accelerating production as the war situation deteriorated. How do you explain this apparent contradiction?" Reynolds nodded, having anticipated the question. "Our interrogations of captured German scientists and review of internal memoranda suggest 3 factors. First, Hitler's increasing detachment from military reality as the war progressed, leading to an emphasis on wonder weapons that might dramatically reverse Germany's fortunes. Second, the Nazi regime's fundamental understanding of war as a psychological rather than purely material contest. They believed breaking British civilian morale would force a negotiated peace. And third, a remarkable case of self-deception within the German High Command regarding the weapon's actual capabilities." "Elaborate on that last point," requested General Eisenhower's representative, a brigadier general who had flown from Paris specifically for the briefing. Reynolds changed to a slide, showing a memorandum from Albert Speer to Hitler, dated August 1944. Speer repeatedly warned that the resources allocated to the V-2 program were disproportionate to its military value. In this document, he explicitly states that, for every V-2 that strikes London, we sacrifice air defense capability against hundreds of Allied bombers targeting our factories. Hitler simply dismissed these concerns, believing the psychological impact would outweigh conventional military calculations. After the formal presentation concluded, Reynolds found himself in conversation with Professor R.V. Jones, the scientific intelligence expert who had played a crucial role in identifying the V-weapon threat in the first place. "Fascinating analysis, Major," Jones remarked, as they stood by a window overlooking a London still bearing the scars of both conventional bombing and rocket attacks. But I wonder if you've considered the counterfactual scenario. What if the Germans had deployed their rocket technology differently? Reynolds raised an eyebrow. How do you mean, Professor? Consider this. Rather than building a complex ballistic missile with sophisticated guidance systems, enormous thrust, and the ability to reach suborbital altitudes, what if they had created a simpler rocket? Lower altitude, shorter range, but deployed in vastly greater numbers and targeted exclusively at embarkation ports prior to D-Day. The implication sent a chill through Reynolds. The mathematical precision of industrial warfare. For each complex V-2, they could have built dozens of simpler rockets, thousands upon thousands raining down on Portsmouth, Southampton, Dover. Precisely, Jones nodded. Our invasion preparations would have been severely hampered, possibly delayed by months, and in 1944, delay favored Germany, with new jet fighters entering production and submarine technology advancing rapidly. He took a sip from his tea. Sometimes, Major, the true genius of engineering lies not in creating the most advanced solution possible, but in creating the simplest solution necessary. As winter deepened, Eleanor Hughes made a discovery that would further reshape the British understanding of the V-2 program. While analyzing captured production schedules from the Mittelwerk facility, she noticed a pattern that had eluded previous investigators. "Major Reynolds," she announced, entering his office without knocking, her excitement overriding protocol. "I believe I've found something significant." Reynolds looked up from the draft of his final report. "What is it, Dr. Hughes?" She spread several documents across his desk. "These are the monthly production records from August 1944 through March 1945. Note the gradual increase in rockets produced from 286 to 396 per month. Expected efficiency improvements as workers gained experience," Reynolds observed. "What's unusual about that?" "It's not the total numbers that matter," Hughes explained, pointing to a column labeled Qualitätskontrolle, quality control. "Look at the rejection rates. In August, 39% of completed rockets failed final inspection and were scrapped or cannibalized. By January, that figure had dropped to 19%, yet the failure rate upon launch remained constant at approximately 20% throughout the period." Reynolds frowned, seeing the discrepancy. They were passing defective rockets? Precisely. As Allied bombing intensified and resources grew scarcer, pressure to increase production led to lower inspection standards. But here's the truly remarkable finding. She produced another document, this one bearing SS letterhead. "This is a security report concerning suspected sabotage at Mittelwerk. According to informants within the slave labor force, organized resistance groups deliberately created defects that would pass inspection but cause failure during flight." "Good Lord," Reynolds breathed. "They were fighting back." Hughes nodded grimly. "At enormous personal risk, the penalty for suspected sabotage was immediate execution. Yet these prisoners, primarily French resistance members, Soviet POWs and Polish civilians, maintained an organized effort to undermine the program from within. Based on these figures, I estimate they may have rendered 300 to 400 V-2s inoperative, rockets that left the factory looking perfect, but would veer off course or explode prematurely once launched." Reynolds leaned back in his chair, absorbing the implications. So even the production achievements Hitler celebrated were partially illusory. The Wonder Weapon program was compromised at every level, strategically misguided, tactically ineffective, and subverted from within by the very workers forced to build it. In January 1946, as Operation Backfire concluded its technical phase, a final demonstration was arranged for military observers from across the Allied nations. Despite the successful test launches, the mood among the British engineers had shifted from initial awe to a more complex appreciation of what the V-2 represented, both as a technological achievement and as a strategic failure. On the eve of the demonstration, Technical Sergeant Winters found Dr. Hoffman standing alone on the observation platform, staring at the final V-2 rocket illuminated by floodlights against the night sky. The German scientist seemed lost in thought, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. "Penny for your thoughts, Doctor?" Winters asked, joining him at the railing. Hoffman didn't immediately respond, his gaze fixed on the missile that represented both his life's work and his nation's defeat. "I was calculating," he finally said. "Do you know how many working hours went into each V-2? Approximately 30,000, from raw materials to launch. Multiply by the 3,000 actually deployed, and you have 90 million hours of human labor. 90 million hours that could have built coastal defenses, repaired bombed factories, or produced conventional weapons that might have actually altered the course of the war." "Why do you think Hitler insisted on it then?" Winters asked. "He wasn't a stupid man, whatever else he might have been. He must have seen the same calculations." Hoffman turned to face him. "Because the V-2 wasn't really a weapon, Sergeant. It was a symbol of German technological superiority, of the inevitable triumph of will over material constraints. When reality, the reality of Allied industrial might, contradicted Nazi ideology, they chose to believe in symbols rather than facts." He gestured toward the rocket. "This magnificent machine, which should have opened space to human exploration, instead became the perfect embodiment of the Third Reich itself, technologically brilliant, practically ineffective, morally bankrupt, and ultimately self-defeating." The final demonstration took place on a clear, cold morning. As the rocket thundered into the sky, Major Reynolds stood beside Professor Penny, both men watching not with the wide-eyed wonder of their first launch, but with the measured assessment of professionals who had looked beyond the spectacle to understand its true significance. "We've learned more than rocket science from this operation," Reynolds remarked as the V-2 disappeared into the upper atmosphere. "We've learned something fundamental about the relationship between technology, strategy, and victory." Penny nodded. "The best technology deployed without sound strategy is merely spectacular waste. The Germans created a weapon from the next war and used it according to the logic of the last one." "And we?" Reynolds asked. "What will we do with this knowledge?" The professor adjusted his glasses, watching as radar operators tracked the rocket's trajectory toward its designated impact zone in the North Sea. "That, Major, is the question that will define the coming decades. Will we pursue technological marvels for their own sake, or will we maintain the clear-eyed pragmatism that ultimately won this war? History suggests the former is more likely. Humans seem innately drawn to the spectacular over the effective." "Perhaps," Reynolds agreed, "but we have one advantage the Germans lacked." "And what is that?" "We can learn from their mistakes. The true legacy of the V-2 isn't the technology itself, but the lesson it teaches, that innovation without strategic purpose is merely expensive vanity." In the aftermath of Operation Backfire, the captured V-2 components and technical data were divided among the Western Allies. The British used their newfound knowledge to develop intermediate-range ballistic missiles, while the Americans and Soviets raced to exploit German rocket technology in what would become the space race. Werner von Braun, granted immunity for his Nazi past, would eventually lead the American space program to the moon, fulfilling the dream that had begun in Germany before the nightmare of war corrupted it. For those who had participated in Operation Backfire, however, the experience left a more nuanced legacy. Captain Tilbury, who had once feared the V-2 would turn the tide of war, later wrote in his memoirs, "What appeared to be Germany's most terrifying weapon proved to be among its greatest strategic blunders. In devoting precious resources to a visually impressive but militarily ineffective program, the Nazi regime revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of modern warfare. That victory goes not to those with the most advanced individual weapons, but to those who most effectively align technological capabilities with strategic objectives." Eleanor Hughes, whose career after the war helped break gender barriers in British engineering, often cited the V-2 program when lecturing on the ethics of technology development. "The V-2, she would tell her students, represents both the pinnacle of human ingenuity and the depths of human folly. It reminds us that what we can build and what we should build are questions that must never be separated." Technical Sergeant Winters returned to civilian engineering but maintained correspondence with Dr. Hoffman, who eventually joined Britain's nascent space program. Their unlikely friendship, forged in the examination of a former enemy's technology, symbolized the complex reconfiguration of international scientific cooperation in the post-war world. And Major Reynolds, whose final report on Operation Backfire became required reading at military academies throughout the Western world, never forgot the fundamental insight gleaned from those cold launches on the North Sea coast. That Germany had created a revolutionary weapon and then squandered it on a strategy that could never succeed. A technological triumph that paradoxically hastened defeat by diverting resources from more effective conventional weapons. The V-2 itself occupies a unique place in military history, a weapon that caused terror but not victory, that pointed toward the future of warfare, but could not change the outcome of its present conflict. In its contrasts and contradictions, in its brilliant engineering and strategic misapplication, it embodies the central lesson that would define conflicts for generations to come. That technology alone, no matter how advanced, cannot compensate for strategic miscalculation. As the Cold War intensified, and both superpowers raced to develop intercontinental ballistic missiles based on V-2 technology, the British engineers who had dismantled, studied, and reassembled Hitler's vengeance weapon understood something their political masters sometimes forgot, that the most sophisticated weapon ever deployed in World War II had also been among its least decisive, not despite its revolutionary nature, but in many ways because of it. In the final analysis, what Operation Backfire revealed was not merely the inner workings of a revolutionary rocket, but the fundamental truth that victory in modern warfare depends not on creating wonder weapons, but on aligning technological capabilities with strategic realities. A lesson written in the contrasting fates of nations that had stood at the same technological frontier, but made very different choices about how to cross it. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.